Hillary Clinton treated the collapse of a country like a television punchline, but Marco Rubio just made her face the brutal reality. A shattered state, where living human beings are sold for $400. She mocked him before he even opened his mouth. By the time he finished, she was completely speechless. I want to begin by acknowledging the Secretary's enthusiasm. Hillary Clinton deployed the word enthusiasm like a weapon. It came with a calculated smile, practiced for 30 years in rooms identical to this, rooms packed with cameras, microphones, and men who mistakenly thought they could break her. She sat with perfect posture, ankles crossed, hands folded securely on the desk. It was the stance of a politician who had survived far more hearings than most of her interrogators had spent in government. He has been in this role for a very short time, she noted, and he has already given more press conferences than most secretaries give in a full term. I admire the energy. Then, she paused. It wasn't a standard political pause. It was a sharp, biting delay, a blade being slowly turned. I remember that energy, she continued. It is the energy of someone who hasn't yet learned that foreign policy is not a speech. It is not a tweet. It is not a press conference. It is the hardest, most consequential work a person can do, and it does not get easier the louder you talk about it. She straightened her papers, a purely theatrical gesture for the cameras. When I served as Secretary of State, I made decisions, difficult decisions, decisions that kept this country safe. I did not do it perfectly. No one does. But I did it with the weight of responsibility that comes from actually sitting in the chair. The smile returned, thinner now, razor sharp. I welcome the Secretary's questions. I hope he learns something from the answers. She had just told the sitting Secretary of State that he needed an education. She didn't realize he possessed her North Africa dossier, and inside that folder were the exact questions she had spent years aggressively avoiding. Marco Rubio didn't snap back. He sat with the disrespect. He analyzed the insult the way a man studies an inflated bill he never ordered, weighing it, calculating its true cost. No jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms, glasses resting on the bridge of his nose. His bare hands lay entirely flat on the desk, framing an unopened stack of documents. For a highly uncomfortable moment, the absolute stillness of his hands was the only response her arrogance received. 3 seconds passed. 4. Mrs. Clinton. You're right, Rubio finally said. His voice was incredibly quiet. Not a dramatic, sweeping quiet. It was the dangerous quiet of a man preparing to speak much faster than the room expected, giving the court reporter a crucial head start. I am new to this job. You had it before me. And you're right, that I talk a lot. My mama always told me I talked too much, even as a kid in West Miami. And she was usually right about things like that. He slowly opened the folder. So, let me do something different today. Instead of talking, I'm going to read. I'm going to read you exactly what you left behind when you sat in this chair. He didn't look down at the pages. He locked eyes with Clinton. My parents came to this country from Cuba in 1956. They left because a regime was falling apart, and nobody in Washington had a plan for what came after. I grew up in a house where the stories people told at the kitchen table were about what happens to a country when a strong man falls, and the people who knocked him down didn't think one day past the knocking. He pulled the first sheet from the stack. You knocked down a strong man, Mrs. Clinton. In 2011, I'd like to talk about what came after. March 2011. Rubio read with blistering speed. Precise. Each fact hit like a high-velocity round, moving faster than the ear could process, but never missing the target. You, as Secretary of State, were the primary advocate inside the administration for military intervention. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates opposed it. He opposed it publicly. Vice President Biden opposed it. The intelligence community urged caution. The Joint Chiefs had reservations. You pushed. He glanced up. You pushed harder than anyone in the room, and you won the argument. He flipped the page. The 20th of October 2011. The leader was captured by rebel forces in the drainage pipe where he was hiding. He was beaten. He was subjected to severe physical violations. And he was eliminated in the street, on camera, by the very people you armed. Rubio set the paper down. His voice dropped heavily, like a plane losing altitude. And on that day, Mrs. Clinton, you appeared on television. You were asked about his demise, and you said, "He isolated every single word. We came. We saw. He passed away." A chilling pause. And you laughed. In the press gallery, a man put down his coffee and completely forgot to pick it back up. You laughed, Mrs. Clinton. The leader of a sovereign nation, a brutal dictator. Yes, a man with a horrific record, I will not defend, was viciously tormented and eliminated in the street. And the chief diplomat of the United States of America went on television and made a joke about it. A joke in the cadence of Julius Caesar. As if the violent end of a human being, however monstrous, was simply a punchline you had been saving for the right occasion. He moved to a new section of the file. His tone shifted from aggressive prosecutor to grim medical examiner. Here is what came after the laughter. He read the consequences like an autopsy report. Year by year, disaster by disaster. The room absorbed the shock slowly, and then, all at once, 2012. The nation violently fractures into competing militia fiefdoms. The country you liberated splits into two rival governments, each claiming legitimacy, each armed to the teeth with weapons from the arsenal of the man you helped remove. There is no successor government. There was never a successor government, because planning for what comes after is the part that doesn't make it into the speech. The 11th of September, 2012. Militants attack the American diplomatic compound in Benghazi. Ambassador Chris Stevens, your ambassador, Mrs. Clinton, appointed on your watch in the country you reshaped, is lost, along with Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. 4 Americans gone in the power vacuum you created, taken by militias you helped arm with weapons you helped put into circulation. An older man in the gallery, wearing a faded service pin, tightly crossed his arms and refused to uncross them. 2014. Extremist terror networks establish a territorial stronghold, training camps, weapons depots, a recruitment pipeline operating just 300 miles from the southern coast of Europe. November 2017. Rubio's voice sank lower, the hushed tone of a man carrying facts too heavy for normal volume. A news network broadcasts undercover footage from inside the country. A dark parking lot. Nighttime. A group of African men standing in a line. Ghanaians, Nigerians, Senegalese, Gambians. Migrants who had come looking for passage to Europe. They are being auctioned. The auctioneer is taking bids. The price. He stopped. The hesitation of a man staring at a number that shouldn't exist is $400 per person. Human beings sold at illicit trading blocks in a country that you liberated. He let the number echo. No one moved. A reporter in the third row, typing frantically since the start, completely froze, her fingers hovering lifelessly over the keys. Weapons from the fallen arsenals cascaded south and east. Surface-to-air missiles, rocket-propelled explosives, armored vehicles. They reached extremist groups in Nigeria, terror affiliates in Mali, armed factions across the entire Sahel region. Mrs. Clinton, an area larger than the continental United States, was suddenly armed with the stockpiles of a military you helped dismantle without securing. Global panels documented the flow. They traced the serial numbers. The weapons belonged to the regime. The resulting chaos was yours. And then came the boats. Hundreds of thousands of desperate migrants fleeing through the territory on rubber dinghies and wooden fishing boats, crossing the Mediterranean in the dark. thousands of them drowning, their bodies washing up on the beaches of Italy and Greece. Every one of them passed directly through the country you liberated, simply on their way to dying at sea. He placed the last page down, lining it up with the rest. A stark row of white paper against dark wood. Each page a year, each year a disaster. Before your intervention, Mrs. Clinton, that nation had the highest human development index in Africa. Free education through university, free health care, functioning roads, functioning courts. It was not a democracy. The leader was a brutal dictator, and I will not stand here and whitewash his crimes. But it was a state. It held together. People lived in it, and they were not sold in parking lots. After your intervention, it is a failed state with open illicit trading markets. That is exactly what you left behind, Mrs. Clinton. His bare hands remained perfectly flat on the desk, exactly where they started. That is what the laughter bought. Clinton leaned toward her microphone. Her response carried the heavy deliberation of a politician who had successfully defended this choice in countless rooms before. The regime was marching on Benghazi. He had promised to hunt his own people down like rats. The United Nations Security Council, not the United States, the Security Council authorized military action. Our European allies led the call. France, Britain. This was not an American war. It was an international coalition acting to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe. Her jaw locked. And the notion that we should have stood by, that the United States of America should have watched from a distance while a dictator massacred civilians in their homes, is not a serious position, Mr. Secretary. Every intervention has consequences. I have acknowledged that. But the alternative was not nothing. The alternative was Rwanda. And I was not going to let that happen on my watch. Behind her, a staffer nervously adjusted a folder. The tiny, unconscious movement of someone desperate to believe their side had reclaimed the high ground. Rubio waited for the movement to stop. Mrs. Clinton, people are dying right now. His tone was chillingly quiet. They're just dying in illicit trading blocks instead of in their homes. You didn't prevent death. You simply relocated it. The staffer's hand froze on the folder. I want to read you one more thing, Rubio stated. He reached under the stack and pulled out a single sheet. Different paper, heavier stock. An official State Department heading at the top, a bright classification stamp, and the dense bureaucratic formatting designed to make terrifying warnings look routine. This is a classified cable sent from the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs directly to your office on the 14th of March 2011. Exactly 3 days before the Security Council vote, 5 days before the first American explosive fell. He adjusted his frames. He read the text slowly, with the solemnity of a man reading a final will, knowing every clause changed the reality of the room. If the leadership is removed, there is no viable successor government. The rebel coalition is fractured along tribal, regional, and ideological lines, and lacks the institutional capacity to govern a post-conflict state. Without a sustained international ground presence and a multi-year stabilization plan, the nation will fracture into militia-controlled zones within 12 to 18 months. He looked right at her. Recommend we condition any military action on a concrete post-conflict governance framework. Proceeding without one risks creating a failed state in North Africa, 300 miles from European shores. He dropped the cable onto the desk. It made a sharp slapping sound. The sound of a devastating truth finally landing after floating in the air for 15 years. The 14th of March 2011. 3 days before the vote. 5 days before the strikes. Your very own intelligence bureau, the experts whose job it is to know what happens in the region. The people who read the data, speak the languages, and hold the contacts. They explicitly told you, in writing, on official letterhead, complete with a classification stamp, that the territory would become a failed state in 12 to 18 months without a plan. He paused. They were exactly right. It took 14. He picked up a second paper, a printout of that exact same warning, but this one featured a frantic handwritten note scrawled in the margin. Large, heavily slanted, the hurried handwriting of a powerful person annotating a memo while rushing to a meeting, completely lacking the patience for a proper reply. This is your exact personal response, Mrs. Clinton, written directly in the margin of the warning. I will read both lines. He read the first scribble. We can't let the regime survive this. The French are moving. He read the second. If we don't lead, they lead. Move forward. He placed the annotated paper beside the original warning. Two historical documents side by side. The warning on the left. The reckless response on the right. The warning: failed state. 12 to 18 months. 300 miles from Europe. The response: move forward. If we don't lead, they lead. If we don't lead, they lead. Rubio softly repeated, no theatrical emphasis. Spoken like a historian etching a damning phrase into a permanent record. That was your primary concern, Mrs. Clinton. Not the innocent people, not the dangerous tribal fractures your own bureau warned you about, not the terrifying 12 to 18-month countdown to total collapse, not the glaring absence of a successor government, not the unsecured weapons, not the violent militias, not the mere 300 miles separating a disintegrating country from Europe. He folded his hands. Your only concern was making absolutely sure that France didn't get the credit for the intervention before America did. He tapped the warning document once with his index finger. The Intelligence Bureau explicitly told you exactly what was going to happen. They wrote it down. They dated it. They formally filed it. Those professionals did absolutely everything a government employee can do to make a person in authority finally hear a desperate warning. He lifted his finger, and your only response was to aggressively scribble 2 words in the margin, move forward. And so, the strikes fell, and the illicit trading blocks opened, and 60,000 human beings are now gone. They perished in a country you shattered, simply because you were terrified the French would break it first. Her own department warned her the nation would collapse. She wrote, move forward on the paper. 3 days later, the strikes began. Today, vulnerable individuals are traded for cash. Rubio finally stood up. He didn't pace the room. He stood perfectly still behind his chair, both hands tightly gripping the wooden frame, refusing to perform, merely holding onto the chair the way a terrified person grips a railing when forced to stare over a dizzying edge. Mrs. Clinton, I want to end exactly where we began. The 20th of October 2011. He paused. We came. We saw. He passed away. A sharper pause. You laughed. Here is the exact reality of what followed your laughter. A failed state with 0 functioning government. Competing militias brutally fighting over the rotting corpse of a country that used to work. Massive weapons flowing to extremist terror networks. Open illicit trading blocks operating under flickering fluorescent lights, where vulnerable black African migrants, actual human beings, Mrs. Clinton, people with real names, with grieving mothers, with the exact same blood in their veins as yours, are forcefully lined up in an empty parking lot and auctioned to the highest bidder for exactly $400. His knuckles turned white on the chair. A massive migration crisis pushing hundreds of thousands of desperate souls onto rotting rubber vessels, drowning thousands of them, and an American ambassador violently struck down inside the burning wreckage that you built. I grew up in a house in West Miami, where Cuba was not a country. It was an open, bleeding wound. My parents fled in 1956 because the regime was collapsing, and absolutely nobody, not the politicians, not the diplomats, not the wealthy people who arrogantly believed they knew what was best for a foreign land they never lived in, had any plan for the morning after. My father worked serving drinks as a bartender. My mother scrubbed floors as a hotel maid. They rebuilt their shattered lives from scratch in a country that let them in. And every single night at the kitchen table, the terrifying story was the same. What happens when powerful people violently break a foreign country and simply walk away? His powerful voice hadn't cracked once. His tight grip hadn't loosened. But his broad shoulders shifted forward. A man leaning heavily into an invisible wind. You completely broke that nation, Mrs. Clinton. You shattered it. And you happily laughed about it on television with the smug cadence of a Roman emperor. And then you simply packed up, went home, and absolutely never went back to fix it. And the innocent people living there, the very people you proudly told the world you were saving, have been trapped, living in the burning wreckage of your television laughter for 15 years. 15 years of zero government, zero law, zero safety, zero future. 15 years of coerced human bondage flourishing in the 21st century. All because you were utterly terrified that the French might get there first. He slowly sat down. No dramatic removal of glasses, no sweeping gestures. He sat because the horrific truth was heavy enough to echo entirely on its own. I don't have a folksy way to say this to you, Mrs. Clinton. I am not from Louisiana. I don't possess a clever metaphor or a charming anecdote about a pet cat. I simply have a terrifying number, 60,000 lost souls. And I have a deeply haunting sound, your television laughter. And those two things will remain permanently chained together in the exact same sentence for the absolute rest of history. And there is absolutely nothing that you, or I, or anyone inside this building can ever do to separate them. The chairman quietly asked if she wished to respond. She slowly opened her mouth. I take responsibility for. And then the practiced sentence completely died. The hesitation was entirely different from any previous silence in any political hearing. She didn't stop because she forgot her lines, or because the words were emotional, or because the optics were dangerous. She stopped because the very concept of the word responsibility had fundamentally mutated while traveling up her throat. She had confidently uttered, I take responsibility regarding this disaster hundreds of times. She had rehearsed it until the repetition felt like conviction, and the conviction felt like an adequate political shield. But today, with the classified intelligence warning resting openly on the desk, with the frantic words, "Move forward," displayed in her own handwriting, with the terrifying ghost of her own laughter playing on an endless loop in her mind, I take responsibility no longer meant what it used to mean. Today, it meant I was explicitly warned in writing by my own experts, and I actively chose to authorize the violent strikes anyway, simply because the French were moving, and I refused to come in second place. She could not force herself to finish the sentence. Her facial expression did not shift. Her features had been trained across 3 decades of media scrutiny to never betray emotion. Her hands did not twitch. Her spine did not bend. But her eyes slowly closed. Not an involuntary blink. A blink is rapid. This closure was longer. Half a second. 3/4 of a second. The highly specific prolonged closure that cameras capture from the front row, forcing viewers to replay the footage 6 times to confirm it happened. It was the desperate eye closure of a powerful person who desperately needs, for a tiny fraction of a second, to completely escape the physical reality of the room. And when her eyes finally fluttered open again, they were not looking at Marco Rubio, not looking at the cameras or the gallery. They were staring straight down at the heavy table, staring at the classified cable, staring intensely at the 2 frantic words she had scribbled in the margins of a desperate warning 15 years ago, in a hand she instantly recognized as her own. I have addressed this matter, she finally whispered. The tone was exactly the same, the exact same controlled temperature, the exact same precision. But in previous testimony, she had never actually addressed this specific handwritten warning. This damning document had never been exposed to the public light. Relying on previous testimony was not an answer. It was simply the desperate sound of a heavy door slamming shut on a room that was already violently broken open. And absolutely everyone inside the building could hear the lock click shut. It was the tragic sound of a powerful woman who had finally run out of safe rooms. The explosive video clip easily broke 60 million views in 48 hours. The internet dubbed it the laughter. The edited 6-0-second version featuring Rubio reading, "We came, we saw, he passed away," instantly followed by illicit trading blocks for $400, ending with, "The burning wreckage of your laughter," intercut with the original 2011 footage of Clinton chuckling, became the most shared political clip of the quarter. The House Foreign Affairs Committee launched a massive formal inquiry into all pre-intervention communications. They placed a laser focus on the classified cables transmitted in March 2011. A formal subpoena was swiftly issued. 2 Democratic committee members publicly demanded a complete accounting of the decision-making process. One of those members had previously served as a co-chair for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. "Move Forward" mutated into a viral hashtag. Then a furious protest sign. Finally, a cultural phrase that completely outlives the news cycle that birthed it. Late that evening, a young man named Kwame stood quietly in a damp alleyway behind a bustling restaurant kitchen in Naples, Italy. He was on his 5-minute break, staring down at the viral video playing silently on a cracked phone screen. He was 29 years old, originally from Accra, Ghana. Back in 2018, when he was just 21, he had desperately paid a ruthless smuggler exactly €400. Every single cent he had painstakingly saved from 2 exhausting years of selling phone chargers at a dusty market. He paid for a promised journey straight through the shattered nation, heading to the coast where a boat would safely carry him to Italy, to a place where actual work existed, where a real future was possible. The boat eventually arrived. But the horrific journey through the collapsed nation was the terrible detail the smuggler omitted. Kwame spent 4 agonizing months locked inside a brutal detention center near Tripoli, a massive, rotting warehouse. The guards were ruthless local militiamen. Whatever horrific things occurred inside the dark walls of that warehouse, he absolutely refused to discuss with anyone. Not with the Italian immigration officer. Not with the other Ghanaian men who worked alongside him. Not even with his worried mother when she called every Sunday. He had only spoken one single sentence about his trauma, exactly once, to a co-worker while hauling heavy trash bags to the dumpster at the end of a long shift. They traded people for cash. That was all he said, and the older man wisely did not ask him to elaborate. He stood in the damp alley, watching the viral clip. He watched Marco Rubio quietly say $400. His scarred thumb instantly pressed the pause button, freezing the image. Rubio's mouth was paused open, the horrifying dollar amount hanging in the air between 2 wealthy individuals sitting comfortably inside a massive room decorated with polished marble and pristine flags. Kwame stared intently at the screen. And then, very slowly, he looked down at his own 2 hands. Hands that had furiously washed dishes, mopped floors, and scrubbed heavy metal pots inside this kitchen for 6 long years. Hands painfully cracked from harsh industrial soap, permanently red from scalding hot sink water. Hands carrying a thick, ugly scar slicing across the left palm, a brutal burn from his first week, because he didn't know the splashing pattern of the deep fryer. These exact hands had been objectively valued at precisely $400 while standing inside a dark parking lot in Tripoli. Today, they were valued at $9 an hour inside a chaotic kitchen in Naples. They were somehow worth everything and nothing, depending entirely on which border you stood inside and exactly who was holding the weapon. $400. That was the ultimate price. the exact monetary value placed upon a living, breathing person inside the country the American Secretary of State had giggled about liberating. He quietly slipped the cracked phone deep into his pocket and turned back toward the kitchen doors. The massive pile of dirty dishes was not going to wash itself. It never did. Somewhere far across the ocean, in a hearing room Kwame would never see, a man from Cuba was telling a woman from Connecticut exactly what her amusement had caused. The terrifying number was 60,000 lost souls. And that horrifying number did not include Kwame, because Kwame had miraculously survived, and the quiet survivors never get counted in the official tallies of the dead. They simply go back to washing dirty dishes in Naples on a quick break with a cracked phone, hiding a thick scar across their palm, and silently carrying a massive traumatic memory they will never discuss. Sitting alone inside his quiet office at the State Department, Marco Rubio called his wife. He didn't want to talk about the hearing. He wanted to talk about Cuba. He talked passionately about his father, Mario, who had worked endless hours serving drinks as a bartender at the Rooney Plaza Hotel in Miami Beach, coming home smelling of sour lime juice, cheap cigar smoke, and pure exhaustion. He talked about 1956, about the terrifying journey from having nothing to finally having something, a journey his parents successfully made across a compassionate country that took them in and asked only that they work hard and tell the truth. "Jeanette," he quietly said into the receiver. They explicitly told her it was going to fail. They formally sent her a classified cable. They clearly wrote it out. 12 to 18 months. Failed state. No successor. And she simply scribbled, "Move forward" in the margin, and then went home. Silence hung on the line. The highly specific silence between two people married long enough to let a heavy sentence settle before responding. "That is exactly what scares me the most about sitting in this chair, Jeanette," he confessed. "It isn't the enemies, it isn't the global crises, it isn't the midnight calls, it is the arrogance. The blinding arrogance of genuinely believing that you actually know what happens the next morning inside a country you have never even lived in, and that you never will." Tucked safely inside her guarded estate in Chappaqua, New York, Hillary Clinton sat totally alone inside her private study. The large television was turned off. The laptop was firmly closed. The heavy curtains were drawn tight against the light. She did not turn on the news to watch the viral clip. She did not need to. She already knew the exact sound of that laughter. She had been forced to hear it played back 1,000 times since 2011, on endless cable segments, debate stages, and from the mouths of furious protesters holding signs with her face and the word Libya. That laughter had stalked her for 15 years. It followed her into a grueling presidential campaign and right out the other side. It followed her into retirement, slipping right through the heavy door of this room, and it was sitting here with her right now, hiding in the dark, resting comfortably in the empty chair directly across from her, acting like a terrifying guest who had been invited inside once and never left. But today, the haunting sound possessed a new soundtrack. Illicit trading markets, $400. The burning wreckage of your laughter. Move forward. She sat in the darkness, surrounded by it all, and the sound of that laughter was the only thing in the room she could not turn off, because it was her own actual voice, permanently entered onto the historical record, remaining on that record forever. No amount of carefully rehearsed previous testimony was ever going to make it sound like anything other than exactly what it truly was. A woman giggling on television about the total destruction of an entire country that she had absolutely no intention of rebuilding. "We came. We saw. He passed away," she chuckled. 15 years later, a completely failed state, 60,000 lost souls, and illicit trading blocks where living, breathing human beings sell for $400. Leave one word in the comments: laughter. Share this with someone who thinks geopolitical regime change is a punchline. They should really hear what it actually sounds like to the innocent people trapped living in the wreckage.